Welcome to our Christian Concept Sunday School lesson, where we focus on the International Sunday School lessons. This week, our focus is in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verse 1 through 12, and the title is The Empty Tomb. I'm your host, Dr. Christie Solomon. There are two goals for you this week that you should be able to achieve through your study. One, you should be able to list important facts surrounding the discovery of the empty tomb. And two, you should be able to compare and contrast the women's expectation when they reach the tomb versus the actual reality. And then our lesson outline is divided into two sections. Section 1 is focused on the early morning discovery, covering verses 1 through 7. Part A, the empty tomb, is revealed to us in verses 1, 2, and 3. And then the two strangers, which are the angels, is shared in verses 4 through 7. And section 2, we entitle it Bearing Witness, and that's covering verses 8 through 12. Part A, the message is proclaimed by the angels, verses 8, 9, and 10. And then the message is verified by the women and Peter in verses 11 and 12. So when you're studying, I trust that you know that you need to get some contextual background of the circumstances that has already happened to connect to your present study. So today's lesson follows the narrative that describes Jesus' crucifixion and his death. And what you need to remember, that this was one way the Roman Empire demonstrated their power over its subjects. This brutal process of crucifixion slowly killed its victims as they bled, became dehydrated, and suffered shock and asphyxiation. The intent for Jesus was to kill the man, stop the message, and the movement. The fact that Jesus died after only several hours on the cross was a surprise to the Romans, making this public exhibition a problem for them, because the bodies of those crucified typically remained on the crosses for several days after death for a spectacle, a visual deterrent. As God would have it, enters in Joseph from the city of Arimathea, a man of wealth and a member of the Sanhedrin Council, who requested Pilate give him Jesus' body. Joseph buried Jesus in his own tomb because of his love. This was not a typical practice for those people who were non-related to that family. I trust that you know Jesus' body was buried and wrapped in those burial clothes as it was entombed, and Aramaic spices were placed within the tomb to cover the stench of the decay. But because Jesus' body was buried the evening before the Sabbath, not giving the women much time to prepare, they had to wait until after the Sabbath for those additional aromatic spices to be administered. Joseph's tomb was like many others that were carved in rocks. Chisel niches allowed for several bodies of the family to be buried in one tomb. A large flat stone would seal the tomb's entrance and prevent thieves from stealing the valuable artifacts that were involved and included, or even the bodies. So tombs remained sealed until all that remained of a body were its bones. And then the family would then enter the tomb and place the bones in a box called an ossuary. So contextually, you may also know that many first-century Jews believed in the physical resurrection of the dead, and that doctrine is shared in Old Testament Job, Isaiah, and Daniel. During Jesus' earthly ministry, he prophesied regarding his own death, burial, and resurrection, resulting in our lesson today of the empty tomb. So here's an interesting fact chart about Luke and the book as well as the apostle. The credited author is Luke. written prior to 70 AD, before the temple was destroyed. It is the 42nd book in the Bible, the third book in the New Testament, and the third of the 4 books of the gospel biography from Matthew to John. 24 books follow after this book of Luke. Luke has 24 chapters and over 1,100 verses, including 24,000, almost 25,000 words, depending on your version. Some observations you may have made about Luke himself: he was a physician. He referred to some of his writing through medical references. Luke was not one of the 12 apostles. The Greek name Luke appears only 3 times in this New Testament. It appears in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1, and Philemon chapter 24. Luke was either a Hellenistic Jew or a Gentile. Tradition says more likely that he was a Gentile. So in Colossians chapter 4, verses 10 to 14, Apostle Paul lists 3 fellow workers who are of the circumcision, and those people of the circumcision, of course, were known to be the Jews, and that's shared in his writing, verses 10 and 11. And then it is included in the verses 12 through 14 with the other 2 Gentiles. So according to tradition, Luke remained unmarried. Luke died at the age of 84, thereabout, and Luke gives the most complete account of Jesus Christ's ancestry, his birth, and his growth and development with his ministry. So the book of Luke is the longest of the 4 books of the biography or the Gospels. Luke emphasizes the chronological and historical accuracy that makes it more comprehensive than the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and even John, because Luke traces Jesus' ancestry all the way back to Adam, and the first 30 years of Jesus' life is summed up in one verse that's mentioned earlier in chapter 2 of this book, verse 52, and it says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." And so Luke has introduced 3 key phrases. One is the Son of Man, mentioned 23 times. The Son of God is mentioned 7 times. And the Kingdom of God is mentioned 32 times. These are some interesting facts you probably know and can reflect on, and certainly go research for yourself about this Gospel of Luke. For those of you who like the visual presentation, we've included some slides that we give credit to the Lumo Project with references to Matthew 28, Mark 16, our Luke story in 24, and John 20. At dawn on Sunday, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices to anoint the body of Jesus. When they arrived, they found the large stone rolled away from the tomb. There had been a violent earthquake, and an angel of the Lord had descended and rolled it back. The guards were so frightened and shaken they had run off. The women were shocked when they looked inside the tomb. They found it empty. Suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning appeared. The women cowered in fright. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" they asked. "He is not here, he is risen. Remember how he told you, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." The woman rushed back to tell the disciples, who did not believe them. Peter and John, however, got up and ran to the tomb. John reached the tomb first but did not go in. Peter caught up and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen and the cloth that had been around Jesus' head and wondered what happened. John joined Peter in the tomb, and when he saw the evidence, believed that Jesus was alive. Neither of them at this time understood from the scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Mary remained outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she looked into the tomb and saw two angels seated where Jesus' body had been. "Why are you crying?" they asked. "They have taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they have put him." A voice behind her asked, "Why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?" She turned around thinking she must be talking to the gardener. "If you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him," Mary declared. "Mary," said Jesus. "Teacher," she cried out. "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father," Jesus told her. "Go and tell the disciples that I am ascending to your Father and my Father, to your God and my God." Mary went to the disciples with the news. "I have seen the Lord," she announced, and told them the things he had spoken to her. And this is a visual of the contextual aspect of Jesus' crucifixion, death, and now the empty tomb because of his resurrection. I trust as you're reflecting on this Sunday school lesson, the application absolutely must point to yourself, and you ask yourself, and now that God has allowed me to be part of his family, how do I enlarge his kingdom and proclaim his word? Our lesson passages 1 through 12. 1. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. 2. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. 3. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. 4. While they were puzzling over this, suddenly 2 men in radiant apparel stood beside them. 5. As the women bowed their faces to the ground in terror, the 2 men asked them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" "6. He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee." 7. The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again. 8. Then they remembered his words. 9. And when they returned from the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. 11. But their words seemed like nonsense to them, and they did not believe the women. And verse 12, Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb, and after bending down and seeing only the linen cloths, he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. And in conclusion, we're going to answer the who, what, when, where, why questions that you should always leave with you finish your study. Who? The angels brought good news. What? Jesus had defeated death. When, after his crucifixion and burial, he was raised from the dead and the tomb. Where did this take place? At the tomb, where the women were the first to hear and share. Well, why? So that the empty tomb would present evidence and the opportunity for the disciples as well as for the women to accept this good news and proclaim it to the new world. And how was this done? Through witness and testimony. I trust that God has enlightened you in helping you understand that we serve a living God. He has risen and he is giving us absolute opportunities to be in a relationship with him. If you like us, give us a thumbs up. Consider sharing this video with your friends and family. Leave us a comment or two and consider subscribing. Until we see you again, remember the empty tomb is a result of Jesus' opportunity to present to us salvation, and that during your growth in your connection to Christ, you will receive the blessings of peace and prosperity and protection in your household for you and your family. I'm Dr. Christie.